Hey everybody, welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to talk about thermoform kayaks and rotomolded kayaks. So these two processes are the two most common ways to make a kayak, and I'm going to go over each process individually, just a quick summary, just to tell you the basics of how these are made. I'm going to go over pros and cons to both processes. I'll go over a couple of misconceptions about both of these processes as well, and stay tuned to the end of the video. I'll talk about maybe who's best suited for each of these processes when you're looking at buying one of these kayaks. So anyways guys, let's get right into it. I'm going to start with just a quick summary of each one of these processes, just the bare bones basics. So I'm going to start with thermoformed kayaks. So you may have heard of rotomolding and you may have heard of thermoform, but may not have known really the meat and potatoes and what's involved with it. So with a thermoform kayak, these are going to be what I'd call your big box store kayaks. You've probably seen them at the grocery store or the farm supply store or the local sporting goods store. These are going to be it looks like two pieces of plastic stuck together to make a kayak. And that's not entirely inaccurate. So what happens with thermoform kayaks is you kind of see it in the name. So they're made out of what they call ABS plastic. And it's a little bit of a different density involved there. So it's a lighter plastic and it's formed in a sheet. And what's happened is that sheet is going to be heated. It's going to be formed over the top of a mold and be vacuumed into that mold to kind of give that final form, that final look. So what thermoforming does is it allows companies to manufacture two different pieces for the kayak and then fit them together. So there can be kind of, there are going to be some pros and cons to that obviously, and I'll get into that. But once the thermoform sheets are formed properly, they're cooled down, and then after that they are formed together with adhesive and tape, which is usually going to be around the water line, which you see here on the middle of this kayak. This is probably the most common manufacturing process in kayaks, and many of you may own or may have owned kayaks in the past that were made by this process. It's very, very unlike the rotomolded process. It allows companies to make them in two parts and then put them together, as opposed to rotomolding when you can make the entire kayak shell all in one process. But the thermoforming process, it is a cheaper process and it does allow for a quicker manufacturing. It's more of a cookie cutter style. You can get a lot more of them chopped out in less time than rotomolding, which does kind of drive down the price of them a little bit and allows them to get more of them out in the market for you guys to look at, of course. So rotomolded kayaks are made out of what they call polyethylene resin or a polyethylene powder. And in the past, rotomolded kayaks were known as polyethylene kayaks. It is a different plastic that's made for the thermoform kayaks, and it's a resin that is dumped into a hollow mold. And what happens is it's put into a rotational oven. So that's where the rotomolded comes from. It's an oven that is filled and sealed with that resin inside of it. It's heated and rotated at the same time. What this allows that company to do is it allows it to create the entire kayak in one process. It's a longer process to do. It costs more, obviously. But what it does is the inside of that mold is coated in that melted plastic. When it's taken out of that rotational process there, it is cooled down, and then when the mold is removed, you have that perfectly formed kayak already done. It's ready to be trimmed up. It's ready to be, put your gear track on it, your foot pegs, whatnot, your seats. But it is a little bit more of a involved process, which again does increase the cost. It makes typically for a thicker kayak, a more durable kayak, and a better performing kayak, but it does cost more. So it does take longer to do, and that's where these two really differ the most, is the production side of it. One process in the same time can kick out 1,000 versus the other side can kick out maybe a couple of hundred. So that's the biggest difference between the two of them, other than the materials and how they're made, is the quantity, the sheer quantity of that. You can make the argument that it's quality over quantity, but again, depending on how you're using a kayak and what you need it to do, one of these may be a little bit better suited for you. And I'll go over that a little later in the video. So I'm going to go over next the common misconceptions about these two processes and kayaks in general. So the number one misconception is that all kayaks are made out of the same kind of plastic, and that's just false. It's not the same. ABS is a little bit more of a waxier plastic, it's a lower density, and it's a cheaper plastic. I mean, it is what it is. As to where the resins, it's polyethylene, which is actually petroleum based. So if you see oil prices going up, fuel prices going up, that raw materials will go up also, but it does make for a different density, a higher density. Think of your natives, your Bonafides, your Hobies, your Jacksons. That thicker, tougher plastic is from that, that process. It's not because it's just thicker. The second biggest misconception in kayaks is where it's made doesn't really matter that much. And there's obviously some outliers there, but the US process with a kayak does matter. The quality of your plastics matter, that higher density matters. So why that matters, and the number one reason, and you may have seen that on our podcast that we did with Tyler Brown, who is the COO of Big Adventures, is the quality process being in-house. The entire process means something. So if they do have a quality issue, they're able to knock it out really quickly, they're able to diagnose it and then move forward, where it makes a small problem from going into a much, much bigger problem, if that makes sense. It also allows that quality process to check. So a lot of these companies in the US check for the thickness in multiple parts of the kayak to make sure you have even coverage, to make sure again, to keep that small problem into getting into a bigger problem. And your warranties, your support, your parts are obviously going to be a lot more readily available in a US company. If you get a foreign company or maybe a big box store, they don't carry the parts, they don't handle warranty, and you're stuck waiting for an email or a phone call back from a manufacturer that just may not do it. So just know that. And again, that's why that's important, is just for the quality process and the fact that if there is a quality issue, you're going to have a better really experience dealing with your paddle shop, dealing with the manufacturer on that replacement if need be. Okay, so I'm going to go over some pros and cons, and I'm going to start with Thermoform. So there are pros and cons to both processes. Thermoform, obviously, the biggest pro is probably it's just cheaper. If the budget isn't for getting spending a couple $1,000s on a kayak, Thermoform may be a good option for you. You can typically get them very cheap. A lot of times they'll be on sale. A lot of times you can find them either online or on a big box store or a farm supply store. There's a lot of different manufacturers and retailers that carry those products, but you can get these for a much lower price than the rotomolded option. And they're more readily available. So pro number two, they're going to be more available. You're going to have more places selling these kayaks, whether it be, again, online, a sporting goods store, big box store, anything like that. Typically, you're going to have more options closer to you than you are with the rotomolded kayaks. And that's obviously a big plus for some of you that don't live near a specialty shop or a paddle shop. And the third pro is they're typically more lightweight. So Thermoform is a lighter version of many of the kayaks out there that are rotomolded. They're very lightweight, which again, if you're looking at car topping a kayak or storing it in some tight areas, maybe you've got an apartment or a smaller home that you don't necessarily want to keep it outside, you want to store it inside, it's not going to take up as much room typically, and it's going to be a little easier when you're talking about hanging it from a roof or the wall. Cons on Thermoform kayaks. So con number one on Thermoform kayaks is you can get some subpar quality. So a lot of people have gotten kayaks or seen them where maybe some things aren't perfect, that some things maybe some edges weren't cut or some scupper holes weren't punched out. There's a lot of things that happen on a Thermoform kayak because of that cookie cutter style of manufacturing process. Now, that may not be the end of the world, but just know that they're not going to be as durable as your rotomolded kayaks as you may not expect them to be. That would be the second con, honestly, is the durability and long-lasting of the Thermoform kayaks. It's just not there. A lot of people will call them disposable kayaks. Maybe you bought one of these just to find out if you're going to enjoy kayaking and you don't want to go too deep in the water and not enjoy it. And I'm just going to call it warranty confusion. So if you bought it from a big box store, if you bought it from the grocery store, and you know who I'm talking about, or farm supply, those retailers don't handle the warranty. And with a thermoform kayak, there always is some confusion. So some of them may claim to have a lifetime warranty. But when you're talking about a thermoform kayak, those are never going to cover normal wear and tear, which are going to be 99% of what you see out of those kayaks. So your warranties are going to be pretty null and void. The reason that's a big deal is, say you got a seat strap that breaks or a buckle that breaks on it, just something really small, but affects how you're going to be able to use that kayak. Nobody carries the parts, nobody can get you the warranty, and essentially you're buying a warranty-less new kayak. So just know that if something like that happens, it's hard to find the parts, and you may be doing some DIY rigging if that's the case. If that's not a big deal to you, again, not much of a con, but it is something you should know up front and ahead of time. Sun, what does sun do to plastic? Especially a thinner plastic, it's going to make it warp, it's going to make it form and mold to the shape that, and if you're sitting in this kayak, it's going to be flexing down and in that sun. Over time, you're going to start to see this part that is sealed together, where those two pieces come together. You're going to see that break down over time. The only bad part about that is your water line. So just know that these are not designed for your big open bodies of water or moving water. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but it's something you really got to be careful on that long-term use. So the quality control process is also a lot harder, and that's con number 4 with Thermoform. A lot of times these Thermoform kayaks are not made domestically. They're shipped over from China or Taiwan or wherever, and you're getting pre-made whole products into the States where they're manufactured or just fully assembled already. And if there is a quality control issue, there's no accountability for that problem. And that's one of the biggest problems. If you do get a quality issue, you've essentially just thrown it away or exchanging it in the retailer for one that is not. So you do get a lot more throwaways in that process, but again, that's somewhat expected, I think. But when you're talking about a few $100s or more, that's still a lot of money in my opinion, and you don't want to just throw it away on something that you don't really know if it's quality or not. So looking at the Rotomolded kayaks, so what are the pros and cons to that? I'll start with the pros. The first one is obvious, it's more durable. So Rotomolded kayaks are made just like your Yeti coolers are. They're thick, they're durable, they're going to have a uniform thickness throughout the boat, which is going to give you that quality, and they're just tougher. They're just made better. Now that may not be the most important thing to you personally. That isn't extremely important to me, but a Rotomolded kayak is just going to last longer. It's going to hold its value for longer, and you want to get into this kayak business with the assumption that you're going to enjoy it, and you're going to typically enjoy it more with that Rotomolded kayak than you are with the Thermoform, depending on how you're using it, of course. And I'll get to that here in a second. So pro number 2 is, and I kind of mentioned it a little bit just a second ago, they do hold their value a little bit better. So that Rotomolded kayak, it's usually by a manufacturer who is known for a quality brand, and people know that. Think of Ford and Chevy and Dodge and all that. You're going to get that with your Rotomolded kayaks, and people know that. So used market will hold their value a little bit better, or a lot better than a Thermoform kayak, but it's not, of course, the same as it was during the COVID years. And the third pro to a Rotomolded kayak is you get superior performance, and that's just the way they're made. Obviously, not every single Rotomolded kayak out there is a phenomenal performance kayak, but they're typically going to perform much, much better than your Thermoform kayaks. Think about tracking, think about turning, and stability. All three of those are going to score higher on your Rotomolded kayaks, just simply because of the way they were designed and the way that they're processed. Okay, so Rotomolded kayaks, is everything good with them? Well, no, not really. So the first con with the Rotomolded kayak is obviously going to be the weight. So Rotomolded is typically going to be heavier than your Thermoform kayaks. There may be some rare instances where it's not, but typically 99% of the time, your Rotomolded is going to be considerably heavier than your Thermoform kayaks. And mainly it's because you're using more plastic, it's a thicker plastic, it's a higher density plastic. And again, higher density is just more weight in a smaller space. So again, you're going to feel that when you're picking it up. Even if they're somewhat lighter, if you're going to thermoform that same kayak, it's going to be considerably lighter. So again, know that going into it. If that may That's always something I think that's extremely important when you're looking at a new kayak is the boat weight matters. So this is bringing it up into a truck bed and out into the water, putting it up on a car top, putting it up on a rack. That is going to be always something you need to consider when looking at a kayak, and rotomolded kayaks are typically going to be a little on the heavier side. So the next con on rotomolded is it's a much more expensive process. It's a much more involved process. Therefore, it does drive the cost up, making it more expensive to buy. They are typically more expensive. Now, you can make the argument that the quality is a lot better than the expense goes up, but it's still you're still going to pay more at the register for a rotomolded than you are typically for a thermoform. And the third con for rotomolded is they're going to have limited availability. This is something that is happening in the kayak industry, is paddle shops, specialty paddle shops are closing down left and right. You are starting to see some shrinking availability there. So some of you may be driving 2 or 3 hours to get to your nearest paddle shop, and they may not even have the selection that is really desirable for you to choose. They may just have 1 or 2 different things, and then that's what you're stuck with. But you are going to expect that limited availability depending on where you live. Some places there may be a little bit better than others, obviously, but you may have to drive a little ways just to get to look at that rotomolded kayak versus the sporting goods store or the big box store there. Okay, so that being said, both of these processes have their place in the market. Obviously they do, otherwise they wouldn't be there. So my opinion, both of these kayaks have, again, those pros and cons, but they have their place. So who is a thermoform kayak meant for versus the rotomolded kayak? So a thermoform kayak is somebody that maybe they want that lighter throw and go kayak, maybe they don't want to spend a ton of money getting into it, or this is going to be for limited use. Think about buddy boat or even a child's boat. But the biggest thing with the thermoform kayak is it's a cheaper option, it's a lightweight option if you have limited availability for transportation. And if you're not going on big bodies of water, think about ponds or small lakes or really slow moving rivers, this could be a really good option for you, albeit, you know, if it's in heavy use, you may want to go over to that rotomolded. And like I said, with the thermoform, with rotomolded kayaks, these are going to be a little bit more for someone who's intending to use them a little bit more. Maybe you want to grow into the kayak and you don't want to have to worry about buying a kayak every couple of years, even though some of us still do that. You don't have to. So that's the thing you get with a rotomolded kayak. It's going to be longer lasting. The warranty is typically going to be a little bit more robust. And this is going to be a kayak that you're going to be able to grow into. You're going to be able to mount different options. Your needs may change, but your kayak doesn't have to with that rotomolded option. So anyways, guys, let me know in the comments down below which direction you ended up going in the past or which direction you're looking at going in the future. Did you go with a thermoform kayak, or do you own rotomolded kayaks and are only going to own those? Let me know why or why not down below in the comments. Start that discussion. Let somebody know that's looking around and may not know. Again, those of you that have experience in the industry may be able to provide that feedback for someone looking at making that first purchase. So anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching the video, and we'll see you on the next one.